I didn't understand how quickly family could become strangers until the night my name turned into a sentence. They led me through halls I had walked my whole life, stone worn smooth by generations of careful feet. Only now the torches burned too bright, their flames too hungry. The same people who once asked after my health spoke as if I was already ash. My mother's gaze slid away when the accusation was spoken, like a veil had been drawn between her heart and my face. Treason, they said. No one described it. No one offered details. They didn't need to. In our bloodline, treason was a word you used when you wanted something removed without staining your hands. Mara stood beside my uncle like she belonged there more than I did, her smile small and measured, as if she'd practiced it in a mirror. When she looked at me, it was with that careful kind of pity people wore when they wanted you to stop hoping. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence did the work of a knife. They blamed me for a letter. An order intercepted, they claimed, meant to weaken the crown of the realm. They called it a pact, a bargain with enemies beyond our borders. But I didn't write any letter. I never touched their seals. I never met the messenger. I never even saw the parchment they held up like proof. I begged them anyway. And that was my first mistake. When I pleaded, they didn't hear truth. They heard guilt dressed in fear. When I asked for witnesses, they pointed to the empty space beside the chair they claimed I'd betrayed from. When I asked why Mara's hands were clean, they told me her loyalty was beyond question. Beyond question. I should have understood then that loyalty was only a virtue when it belonged to the right person. My uncle ordered my wrists bound. My mother's fingers trembled over the clasp before she forced herself to close it. The motion too practiced, too final. Mara watched the chains settle against my skin and then, softly, almost kindly, touched my arm. "For the realm," she murmured. I wanted to ask, for what part of the realm? The one where my breath gets stolen? The one where my future dies in a cell? Instead, I swallowed the questions and tried to keep my face steady. If they were going to judge me like a criminal, I refused to make it easy. I refused to cry in front of the people who had already decided I was guilty. They didn't march me to the court. They didn't offer a trial. They took me to the dungeon. The stairs down were old, deeper than they had any right to be. Even the air felt different there, thicker, metallic with cold iron, and layered with the faint sourness of past prisoners who'd stopped believing their names mattered. The torchlight at the bottom barely reached the corners, and shadows curled around my ankles like curious beasts. Chains were waiting. The iron cuffs bit, and the moment the first shackle closed, something in me went rigid, not from fear, but from the shock of realizing how thoroughly I'd been removed. I was no longer a daughter, no longer a member of the house. I was a problem being stored. "See the Alpha King's collection," one of the guards joked, but his laugh didn't travel far. Something about the way the dungeon's swallowed sound made every word feel like it would be trapped forever. The Alpha King. I'd heard stories the way everyone in the realm did. A beast-bound ruler, a man crowned not only in flesh, but in claws. His power was spoken with reverence and dread, his beast form said to have ruled for years, his walls holding back both armies and hunger. They said his fortress kept its own laws. They said once he decided you were something, you stayed that way. A guard shoved me forward, and the dungeon's door thudded shut behind me. The sound reverberated until it became a pulse, once, twice, like a heartbeat deciding I would belong to the dark. I stared at the floor until my eyes stopped seeing movement. Hours passed, or days. In the dungeon, time became a rumor. When they brought me food, it was never enough. When they brought me water, it tasted slightly wrong, like it came from a source that didn't want me alive. I learned the rhythm of the guards' footsteps. I learned which lantern made the bars shine like wet teeth. I learned how long silence lasted before something shifted in the far darkness. But no matter what they did, I refused to become small. Even when my stomach curled into knots, even when my throat dried from the effort of not breaking, I sat upright. I kept my wrists still. I took inventory of my body like it was a map I needed to survive. And I watched. Not the guards, not the flickering shadows. The corner where no torchlight reached. There, the air changed when the Alpha King's patrol passed overhead. Even in the dungeon, I felt him like weather. A pressure, a presence. It was strange, the way my instincts reacted, not in fear alone. Something deeper, something older than the family that had betrayed me. When his beast form arrived, because the stories were true, and I felt the shift like thunder approaching, the hairs on my arms lifted, though the stones stayed cold. The scent that drifted through the crack beneath the dungeon door wasn't just wolf or fur. It was iron, rain, and the faintest hint of crushed herbs. The Alpha King's world wasn't clean. It was raw and alive. The first time I heard him, I didn't understand what my heart did in response. It tightened, yes, it braced, but it also, ridiculously, remembered. Like my bones recognized a promise my mind didn't. I told myself it was nonsense. I told myself the dungeon had made me delirious. Still, when the guards spoke my name, my real one, not the treason word they'd stamped onto it, I heard his beast through the bars. Like his attention could find me without him needing to see. Days later, when I was too weak to keep my posture from slumping, the door opened. Light spilled in, thin and unwilling, and shadows stretched across the stone. The guard stepped back as if making space for something heavy. Then the Alpha King appeared. K.L. Roslin. The name moved in the air like a threat and a prayer. He didn't wear the bright finery of a court. He didn't look like the painted kings in old portraits. He looked carved out of the realm's own darkness. Shoulders broad, posture controlled, eyes amber gold that caught the torchlight and turned it into something dangerous. But what frightened me most wasn't his face. It was the way the beast inside him made the room rearrange itself. The bars didn't rattle. The stones didn't crack. Yet the dungeon felt like it drew a breath. K.L. stepped forward slowly. His gaze tracked the chain around my wrists, the dry bruises on my skin, the way my hair had fallen loose from its braid. He studied me the way someone studied a blade, considering its edge. His expression didn't soften. It didn't need to. His attention alone was an impact. "Lyra Voss," he said. Hearing my own name from his mouth made my throat ache, like it wanted to believe something. He glanced at the guards. "Who brought her?" The guard cleared his throat. "Her house. For treason, my lord." Kale's eyes slid back to me. I waited for condemnation, for a command, for cruelty. But instead, something in his presence shifted, subtle as a scent changing direction, like his beast form was taking a step closer to my cage without permission. He didn't ask for proof. He didn't demand witnesses. He just looked at me, and the dungeon felt too small for the tension of his focus. "Enough," he said. 2 words. The guards hesitated. "My lord, enough." The guard bowed his head and backed out. The door started to close. Kale didn't move away from the opening. He leaned in slightly, just enough for me to smell the rain on stone in him. For a moment, I thought he might touch the chain. Then, as if he'd reconsidered, he withdrew his hand and turned his head toward the darkness beside the bars. I felt it again. The beast inside him, pressing forward. Not attacking, protecting. Kale's gaze returned to my face. "You'll eat when I say you will," he told me. Not a request, not kindness. Order. And yet, when the guards were gone, the corner where torchlight died seemed to brighten by a fraction, as if the darkness itself had decided to keep watch. They returned with a small bowl later. Not a scornful portion, not tainted water. A proper meal. I didn't trust it. I'd learned what enough meant in my family's home, When they decided something wasn't worth the truth, they still found the time to be precise with cruelty. So I waited. I picked up the spoon carefully, holding it above my lap first to check for poison silver on the surface. I sniffed the broth until I could name the herbs in it. I tasted one drop and let it sit on my tongue. No bitterness, no metallic sting. I ate. The food tasted like warm bread, salted broth, and something that reminded me of the summer our grandmother used to open the window and let the air flood in. My throat tightened again, not from sadness, but from the shock of being treated like I might still have a future. When I finished, I didn't collapse. I wiped the bowl clean with my sleeve and set it near the door, not because anyone had demanded it, because I still owned my hands. When I looked up, I found I wasn't alone. The corner had moved, not with footsteps, not with a shadow shifting like smoke. It moved like a creature taking a position. Something watched me from the darkness, a presence too large to belong to any man. The beast. Kale wasn't in the room, but the beast was. I held my gaze steady until my eyes burned. "If you're going to keep watching," I said softly, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice, "then you can do it all the way, not half." The silence that followed was thick. Then the air changed, subtle, like fur brushing a floor. The next night when I asked for water, one was left outside my reach. The guards didn't hand it to me. Kale's presence did. I began to recognize the pattern. When I needed something, when my breath grew ragged, when my wrists stiffened, small mercies appeared in the dungeon, like they'd been placed carefully by hands that weren't visible. A blanket folded neatly near the wall, a clean cloth, a strip of dried fruit that tasted like honey and smoke. The beast wasn't just listening, it was learning me. And I was learning how to survive inside a cage built for someone else's story. When the guards finally returned to drag me deeper into the dungeon's belly for interrogation, I didn't fight them. I didn't plead. I didn't beg for my innocence. I focused on the small things. I watched where their torches were aimed. I listened to their breathing patterns. I studied the latch on the iron door so I could feel it in my muscles. Because if I couldn't escape with strength, I could escape with knowledge. The deeper cells smelled different. Less rust, more cold stone and older magic. There were symbols scratched into the walls, half erased by time and claw marks. In their curves and angles, I recognized something my mother had tried to teach me once, before she'd taught me fear. The hidden language of our line, the part of the bloodline that wasn't meant for daylight. I traced one symbol with a fingertip despite the pain. The mark was warm, not with heat, with recognition. I whispered the old words under my breath. My mother had called them superstition. My uncle had called them dangerous. But when I spoke them, the stone vibrated, just slightly, like a sleeping beast waking for the first time. The guards froze. One of them spat. "She's reciting." Kale's voice cut through the chamber, arriving from somewhere above, like thunder rolling into a cave. "Leave her." The guards didn't argue. The command held too much weight. The door opened. Kale stepped in this time without the slow hesitation of courtly entrances. His eyes met mine and held. His beast scent wrapped around me. Rain, iron, crushed herbs. Stronger here, as if the dungeon itself was closer to his true form. I stood as much as the chains allowed. "You brought me here," I said, and my voice didn't shake. He tilted his head, watching. I swallowed, forcing my thoughts into order. "I didn't do what they said. I want the truth searched. I want the letter found. I want whoever touched it to be questioned." He stared for a long moment. I expected anger or disbelief. Instead, I saw something else in his gaze. Something that looked like restraint dragged across a blade. Like he wanted to break the world open, but refused to do it without permission. The beast inside him shifted behind his ribs, and the room's air thickened again. Kale's mouth didn't curve, but the pack, his presence as a whole, seemed to lean closer through the stone. He exhaled slowly. "You're not afraid to speak." "You brought food," I countered. "And the guards don't touch me when you're around." His eyes darkened. "You're noticing patterns." "I'm learning how you work," I said, "so I can survive you." That finally made his beast stir in a way that felt almost amused. Kale's gaze dipped to my wrist where the chain had left bruises in the shape of restraint. "Your family won't question the letter," he said. I felt my stomach drop. "Because they're guilty?" "Because they're afraid," he corrected. Kale stepped closer, stopping just out of reach. The chain between us felt symbolic, like the dungeon had created a barrier not only for my body, but for my hope. "You have something they want," he continued. "And they used treason to keep you from ever claiming it." My pulse hammered. "What do they think I have?" Kale's eyes shifted to the symbols on the wall. Then his gaze returned to mine, and his voice went lower. "A power that doesn't belong to a single house." The words should have frightened me. They did. But they also sparked something, a stubborn, bright flame. Not the flame of confidence, the flame of recognition. If I had powers, then my family hadn't just framed me. They'd stolen my future. And if Kale knew that, then maybe the dungeon wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of a new kind of captivity, one where I chose what I became. Kale gestured to the guards outside. "Bring the seer." "Why?" I asked. He didn't look at me when he answered. His attention stayed on the symbols, as if they were drawing him in. "Because your family didn't only accuse you, they tried to erase what you are." The seer arrived 2 nights later in a cloak stitched with thread that glimmered faintly like trapped stars. Her eyes were milky, and her hands trembled until she laid them flat on the stone beside me. "Daughter of the hidden line," she whispered. My breath caught. No one in my house ever spoke like that. No one gave my bloodline the respect of prophecy. The seer turned her head to Kale. "This isn't treason," she declared. "It's containment." Kale's jaw tightened. "Speak plainly." The seer swallowed. The letter was a lure. The seal was broken long before it reached her hands. Your beast knows it. The pack knows it. The dungeon's wards know it. My skin prickled. Wards. Kale's beast. So my instincts weren't madness. My powers weren't a delusion the dungeon planted. The seer traced her finger along the symbol I had spoken. "She carries a key," she said. "Not to escape a cell, though it might. A key to reclaim a bond your line tried to sever." Kale's eyes flashed amber gold, and for the first time I saw the flicker of something raw behind the control. Not emotion spilled freely, but a wall shifting. "Your family is not her only enemy," the seer warned. "There is a debt in her blood, and once it wakes, it will call something that cannot be uncalled." The seer turned to me. "Do you understand what you are carrying?" I looked down at my bruised wrists and thought of the chain around my life. "I understand they lied," I said, "and I understand I'm done letting lies decide my worth." The seer nodded slowly, as if my stubbornness was another form of magic. Kale ordered something that made the guards exchange terrified glances. "Bring her out." "Out?" the guard stammered. Kale's voice sharpened. "To my court." The dungeon's air seemed to crack. The pack's presence surged through the stones like a tide. I felt eyes on me, watching from above, from windows, from trees outside the fortress where wolves waited with silent patience. They were angry. Not because I'd committed treason, because someone had tried to steal what was protected. I was brought into the throne room with my wrists still chained for now. The guards walked too quickly, as if afraid the air might bite. Kale walked beside me instead of behind me. He didn't touch my arm. He didn't need to. His beast's scent followed me like a vow. When we entered, the court erupted with whispers. They weren't whispering about my supposed guilt. They were whispering about the way Kale's pack behaved. The wolves didn't gather where they normally did. They stayed too close, too attentive. Even the carved stone above the throne looked like it watched. Kale approached his seat and stopped, not sitting yet. His gaze moved over the room. Finally, it landed on Mara. She sat where she always had, near enough to feel important, far enough to avoid blame. Auburn hair gleamed under torchlight. Her broken family crest ring caught a flicker of light when she shifted her posture. Her eyes met mine. For 1 second, her expression held, still and composed. Then her face hardened. Not surprised, annoyed. Like she'd expected me to stay in the dark, where she could control the story. Kale ordered, "Remove the chain." The guard hesitated. The Alpha King's beast snarled without sound, just a pressure that made the guard's shoulders drop. The chain came off. My wrists burned where the metal had bitten, but the freedom felt more intense than pain. Mara rose slowly, like she was preparing to speak to a servant, not a woman she had condemned. "My lord," she began, her voice smooth. "You've been misled. This woman—" Kale interrupted her with a single glance. Not cruelty, authority. The pack quieted. Mara's next breath seemed to catch. She recovered quickly and lifted her chin. She tried to sabotage the crown. I stepped forward before anyone could tell me to. Not to confront, to claim space. To prove I still had agency, even when everyone wanted to reduce me to an accusation. "I want the letter," I said. Mara's eyes narrowed. "It was seized." "From where?" She faltered for half a heartbeat. Only half, but it was enough. Kale's attention sharpened, and the beast form in him surged like a storm approaching a shoreline. The seer stood to one side and raised her trembling hands. "The seal was a copy," she declared. "A false key to wake false power." Mara's jaw tightened. Her smile returned, but it was thinner now. "Seers see what they're told," she said. The room shifted. Wolves pressed closer to the edges of the throne room. Their bodies were still, but their attention was a living thing. Kale finally sat, and when he did, the air became heavier, like the throne had swallowed the light. "Prove it," he said. Mara's gaze flicked to the court attendants. I watched her hands, her ring, the crest. She touched it absent-mindedly, like she was anchoring herself to the lie. One of the attendants stepped forward with a sealed parchment wrapped in black ribbon. My stomach turned. I recognized the ribbon. Not from the letter they'd shown my family. From my childhood, when my mother used it to bind herbs for healing. She taught me how the knots mattered, how the pattern kept the potency from spilling into the air. Mara had never been close to those lessons. Yet here the ribbon lay, in the same knot. A copy. Or a theft. Kale's gaze fixed on the parchment. "Bring it." The attendant hesitated. "My lord, the seal." Kale's eyes darkened. The attendant stepped forward, holding the letter out like it might burn. When the parchment reached Kale's hands, the court held its breath. Then the seer whispered, "Don't open it by force." Kale paused. His attention moved to me. Not begging, offering a choice. I stepped forward and reached for the black ribbon. My fingers brushed the knot, and the magic in it hummed like a remembered song. My power stirred in my blood, not as a weapon, but as a key recognizing its lock. Mara's eyes widened, just slightly. "Lyra," she hissed. I turned my head. "No," I said. "You don't get to say my name like you own it." Kale watched me remove the ribbon carefully. The court had expected anger, accusation, maybe tears. Instead, I worked like a healer would. Steady hands, precise movements, ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in consequence. When the seal broke, it didn't explode. It bled light. A faint silver shimmer spread across the parchment, and ink lifted from the fibers like smoke unraveling. Hidden beneath the false message were older scratches, thin, jagged lines that spelled a different truth. A confession made by someone who had used my name as a lure. My breath stuttered. Kale stood. The beast in him responded instantly, an involuntary shift that made the wolves in the room tremble with excitement and fury. Mara took a step back. Her composure cracked. Only for a moment. Then she recovered, but her eyes were too bright now, too frantic. That's when I understood the twist that had been hiding in plain sight. Mara hadn't just betrayed me. She'd benefited. The treason wasn't to protect Kale's crown. It was to keep the power inside me from ever waking in the right place. Kale's gaze moved from the parchment to Mara. "Where did you get the ribbon?" Mara's smile tried to return, but it looked like it hurt her face. "From the house records." "She wouldn't know." I cut her off, softly. "I learned those knots from my mother." Kale's eyes narrowed. Mara's gaze flicked toward my wrists, toward the crescent scar at my collarbone, the one she'd once touched when she thought no one was watching. A mark of hidden line magic, a mark that shouldn't have existed outside bloodline women. But it did. Because Mara had seen me, even when the rest of my family pretended I was invisible. Her voice dropped to something dangerous. "If you carry a key," she said, "then you can't walk free. You weren't meant to." Kale's beast surged. The room shook, not physically but emotionally, like the pack's instincts had turned into teeth. Mara blinked, startled by her own words, because she'd finally said out loud what everyone else only implied. She'd declared that my freedom was theft. Kale stepped toward her, not to strike, to choose the kind of punishment that would protect the realm. His pack moved with him, wolf bodies sliding into a semicircle that didn't block her escape, but made leaving feel impossible. There was no chaos, no brawl, just inevitability. Mara opened her mouth again. I realized I was shaking, not from fear, from the sheer intensity of finally being believed. But belief didn't erase what had been done. It didn't repair my body's bruises. It didn't undo the nights in cold stone. So I stepped forward beside Kale and lifted my chin. "I want justice," I said. Kale's gaze flicked to me. The beast inside him steadied, like it had been waiting for me to speak my own boundaries. The court expected him to order her execution, or banishment, something final. But Kale's voice was measured. "You'll answer for the lie, not through death, through truth." Mara's face went pale. Truth. That word was a blade against her carefully built lies. A week later, the kingdom learned the depths of betrayal. Not only had Mara framed me with a false seal, she had used forbidden warding to weaken the part of me that could reveal the truth. And she'd done it under the cover of family duty. The confession she'd hidden inside my family's history surfaced when the seer spoke the old words again. Words I'd begun to understand the moment I woke in the dungeon. The power inside me wasn't meant for fighting. It was meant for binding and unveiling. A healing magic wrapped in transformation. It was slow. It required trust, and my trust had been destroyed. At night, when Kale's patrol passed the dungeon's outer corridors, my body responded like it recognized his scent as a safe path home. I began to feel my strength returning, not because the dungeon suddenly became kind, but because someone outside it was choosing me. Kale didn't come to the cell every day. He didn't hover. He didn't treat my hope like a toy. Instead, he arranged for my healing while keeping his distance, as if he worried that being close would break something sacred. When the guards brought me water, it was warm. When they brought me cloth, it was clean. When I asked about the letter's author, the true culprit, information arrived in pieces, not in a rush. Kale's beast protected the path. Kale's walls kept me from rushing through it too quickly. Slow burn wasn't a metaphor in that fortress. It was survival. The shocking twist didn't come with blood or fire. It came with intimacy of a different kind. One evening, Kale visited me in a room carved beneath the fortress, where the wards hummed with old magic. He had a black cloak over his shoulders, and his eyes looked darker than usual, like the night had found its way into him. I sat on a bench with a basin of water, washing herbs I'd been allowed to grow near the dungeon's entrance. Small things that reminded me I still belonged to the living world. Kale stood at the doorway and watched me work. I didn't look up right away, not out of disrespect, out of control. If he was going to be a king and a beast, then I was going to be more than a rescued girl. I was going to be someone who could choose her own pace. When my hand stopped moving, I finally looked up. His gaze settled on my collarbone scar. The crescent mark had faded slightly, like it had been sleeping. Now it pulsed faintly. "Your power is waking faster," he said. I wiped my hands on a cloth. "Because you stopped feeding me lies." Kale's jaw tightened. The beast in him responded to my words like it had been hungry for honesty. He stepped closer, but didn't cross the ward line on the floor. He respected boundaries I couldn't yet enforce for myself. That mattered. I could feel it. "Tell me what you are," he said. "My bloodline used to keep hidden magic," I replied. "Healing, binding, unveiling. That's all I know." Kale's eyes narrowed. "It's more." I met his gaze. "Then tell me what else you know." Silence stretched. The wards hummed between us. Kale's voice dropped, almost rough. "When you were in the dungeon, the beast didn't just find you safe." I felt my throat tighten. "Meaning?" He stared at me as if the answer cost him something. Then he said, "Your power isn't only yours." My stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" Kale stepped back an inch, like the words had moved too close to me. "There was a bond once," he admitted carefully. "Before the beast ruled alone. Before the fortress turned into a lock." My heart stumbled. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but I didn't, because agency was my armor now. If he was going to speak, he would speak in his own time. I asked the question I could control. Did my family break that bond? Kale's expression darkened. They tried to sever it. They claimed it would destroy the realm. They claimed the stars cursed my line. The mention of stars made my skin prickle. The seer had said something about prophecy. Kale continued. But your blood responded to my beast like it recognized a mate bond signature. The words didn't make me feel romantic. They made me feel exposed. Like someone had pointed at the place inside me that had been waiting too long. I stood, slow and deliberate. Don't say it like it's destiny meant to trap me. Kale looked at me. The beast in him settled. Not satisfied. Understanding. I'm not trying to claim you, he said. I'm trying to make sure you choose. I stared at him, the air thick with unsaid things. Choice only exists if I get to walk away. Kale's eyes narrowed, and I felt the pack shift, an instinctual protest. But the walls didn't come down all at once. Instead, Kale reached into his cloak and removed something small. A chain-link charm etched with the same symbol I'd traced on the dungeon wall. He placed it on the bench between us. Walk away, he said, and you'll keep it as proof of what could have been. My breath caught. It was such a dangerous gift, freedom paired with temptation. I picked up the charm. It was warm, like it had been waiting for my palm. For days after, I didn't trust myself. Kale's protection felt like a cage made of silk. I needed to know whether he would still protect me if I refused him. So I did the hardest thing I'd ever done. I rejected his assistance. I told the guard I'd manage alone. I refused extra food. I refused the offered escort to the apothecary. I insisted on learning my herbs by myself. When I returned to my room, I listened for footsteps. I listened for the beast's presence. At first, the fortress felt too quiet, like the pack might be punishing me for my distance. But then, in the night, something changed. Not in my room, outside the door. A soft scrape. A bundle of herbs placed neatly against the threshold. No one entered. No one challenged me. The pack had chosen its method of obedience. Patience. Slow burn, again. Not just romance, a lesson. I began to heal not only my body but my mind. I stopped expecting betrayal in every glance. I stopped flinching when kindness arrived. And I started practicing my hidden magic with discipline. My powers awakened in ordinary ways. I hummed while I worked in the kitchens to keep the herb's essence steady. I mended torn linens with careful stitches, and the fabric gathered itself back into strength. I sat with injured pack folk when they'd been hurt by training accidents, pressing healing warmth into their wounds. No fighting, no spectacle, just care. The fortress began to change around me. The wolves watched, not with hunger, with attention. Kale's beast followed my routine like it was learning a new map. And slowly, his walls, those thick, impossible walls built from years of beast-dominant rule, began to lower. It wasn't dramatic. It was visible in tiny choices. When he spoke to me now, his voice wasn't always command. Sometimes it was question. Sometimes it was quiet consideration. Sometimes, when he thought I couldn't hear, the pack sounded like it was taking a breath they'd forgotten they could take. The day everything fractured again was the day I learned my greatest twist. Mara wasn't the only one who had planned my betrayal. My family wasn't the only enemy. The seer brought me a message carved into bone, an old mark used by the warders beyond the fortress. "They can't keep you imprisoned forever," the message read, "because your power is a key, and keys attract locks that want to open." I stared at the bone until my vision blurred. "What locks?" I asked. The seer's milky eyes avoided mine. "Your bond, Kale's beast line, and something else bound to it." Kale arrived as if he'd felt my tension change through the stone. He read the bone message, then went still. The air around him tightened. The beast in him didn't snarl, it warned. "Tell me," I said, forcing my voice steady. Kale looked at me, and his restraint trembled like a chain under strain. "There's an oath," he said. "A covenant older than this fortress. It binds my beast to the realm's survival. Someone tried to turn that survival into a weapon." I swallowed. "Mara?" Kale's eyes darkened. "Not only her." He turned his head toward the doorway, as if he could see the conspiracy in the hallway. "Tonight," he said, "the dungeon won't hold you anymore." Fear rose, clean and immediate. Not fear of Kale. Fear of what would come if my hidden power truly attracted a lock that wanted to open. Kale didn't touch me when he guided me to the courtyard. The pack moved with us, a silent orbit. When the moon rose, I felt it. A pressure in my bloodline, a pulse that matched the crescent scar at my collarbone. Magic in the air thickened like fog. Then the shadows between the trees shifted. Not guards, not wolves. Strangers, masked, warded, moving with purpose. They carried chains stamped with warding marks I recognized from old family texts. The same style used to bind hidden line magic. They weren't here for Kale. They were here for me. My agency tightened into resolve. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I stepped forward with my hands raised, not in battle, but in command of healing. I began to hum. The sound wasn't pretty. It was ancient. It steadied my power as it rose. The air rippled with my notes, and the moonlight caught on the crescent scar like it was responding. The attackers hesitated. Their magic struggled against my hum. Then one of them hissed and threw a chain forward. It should have caught my wrists. Instead, it stopped mid-air. Not because I fought it, because my power had recognized the symbol and refused it. The chain fell to the ground, clanking like it had lost its will. The pack roared silently, bodies tense, ready to defend. Kale moved forward then, finally crossing the distance he'd kept. His beast form surged behind his skin, making the air taste like rain and iron. But he didn't let the pack attack wildly. He controlled the chaos. He stood between the attackers and me, not to prove dominance, but to keep me from being harmed as my power surged. And I realized something heartbreaking. Kale's beast didn't only want to protect me. It wanted to keep me contained, because the covenant made him afraid of what my power could awaken. The love I'd been offered had a warning built into it. It was why his walls had been high for years. He wasn't cruel, he was careful. He was afraid of breaking destiny wrong. The attackers retreated but not defeated. They moved like they'd simply postponed the next attempt. After they vanished into the night, Kale stood rigid, his gaze fixed on my chest as my hum faded. "What did you do?" he asked. I lifted my chin, breathing hard. "I made the lock refuse the keyhole." Kale's eyes widened slightly, and the beast inside him shifted again, this time not as warning, as hunger, for truth, for choosing. He lowered his voice. "You're stronger than the prophecy claims." I met his gaze. "No." I stepped closer, closing the distance he'd kept for so long. Not to threaten, to claim conversation. "I'm just done being handled," I said. "If destiny wants to bind me, it will bind the version of me that chose to wake up." Kale's throat tightened. His pack pressed closer, not because they were ordered, because the bond inside the fortress recognized my agency. Then Kale did something that broke the last layer of his wall. He took the charm from the bench we'd used before and held it out to me. "You can walk away," he said again, but now his voice held something different, something like surrender. Not to weakness, to honesty. "The covenant doesn't own you," he added. "Not anymore." My breath caught. I wanted to believe him fully. But belief wasn't something I could demand. It was something I needed to earn and test. So I did. I asked him one final question, one that my family had never answered honestly. "Why did you protect me?" I said. Kale didn't answer with grand words. He answered with a shift in his beast. The pack's eyes softened at my feet. A wolf moved near my ankles, not pushing, not claiming, just offering warmth, like a promise that could be refused. Kale's amber gold gaze held mine. And without saying love, without spilling emotion like a confession, he showed me the truth. His beast had chosen me long before his mouth would allow it. My power steadied. My mind stopped expecting betrayal. And then, in the quiet that followed, I allowed myself to step into the space between us. Not as a prisoner, as a partner. Kale didn't grab me. He didn't rush. He waited until my hands lifted first. When my fingers brushed the edge of his cloak, his shoulders eased, as if a long-held breath finally released. In the days that followed, my healing became a ritual. I mended what the dungeon had broken. I hummed to keep my power balanced. I cleaned the throne room not to serve, but to claim the space for someone who wouldn't let lies rule again. The pack gathered at the windows when I worked, not for entertainment, for belonging. KL watched from a distance at first, then closer, then in quiet proximity that didn't feel like a leash. It felt like a choice. The final twist arrived months later when the seer revealed the Covenant's origin. Kale's beast line hadn't been dominant for years because it was cursed. It had been dominant because the realm had needed a wall. And the hidden magic inside me had been the key to soften that wall, if it woke in the right hands. I wasn't the weapon that would destroy him. I was the healer that would bring him back from the beast's isolation. The prophecy had been wrong only in one way. It had never accounted for my agency. I didn't just become chosen. I became powerful enough to choose what the bond would mean. When the time came for a new council, when rivals tried to undermine the crown, I stood beside Kale, unchained now not only by iron, but by fear. Mara had been removed from court, not killed in the dark, not spared out of mercy. She had been forced to confess, and then sentenced to a life of ward-keeping, stripped of her position and her access to forbidden seals. Justice, imperfect but real. The realm held its breath. Kale's beast didn't dominate the room. It coexisted. It watched my hum as I spoke the first healing wards for the kingdom's sick. The pack responded. They didn't kneel blindly. They followed because the proof was in the ordinary magic I practiced. Care, steadiness, restoration. And when Kale finally stepped closer to stand at my side, his wall was gone enough for me to see the man inside. Not soft, not harmless, but human in the ways that mattered. I met his gaze, and the beast at his feet nudged toward mine, an animal's understanding more honest than any court speech. The bond settled between us like a mantle, not dragging me into a cage, not offering fairy tales, offering a destiny that had finally been rewritten by the person it was always meant to belong to. I healed. I chose. And Kale Roslin didn't reclaim me as property. He anchored me as a queen in the making. When the moon rose over the fortress that once felt like a lock, I felt my power glow softly beneath my skin. Not as danger now, but as the quiet strength of something finally understood. The kingdom's future wasn't built on cruelty. It was built on truth. And my truth belonged to me. Kale's beast brushed the air near my shoulder, not touching, just acknowledging. I turned toward him and let my voice carry through the stone like music. Now, I said, we start again.